So for the purpose of rejecting all my opinions, it will be enough if I find in each of them at least some reason for doubt. If it's possible to doubt one of my opinions, if there is any reason at all to doubt some piece of knowledge, then Descartes is saying, I can't count that as knowledge, and I have to demolish it. I have to rid myself of it. I need to shed every idea I have that I am not absolutely certain is true. So this is a kind of interesting exercise that you can do at home, right? And we'll keep walking through what his reasons are for doubting various different opinions and kinds of knowledge. But it's a pretty radical project, and it's often referred to as the project of radical doubt. Descartes' project of radical doubt is to doubt everything that can be doubted and see if anything is left standing. Right? The question at heart is there any such thing as absolute truth at all? Does anything count as absolute truth? So continuing on page 17. No, I'm so sorry. I'm on page 76. That 17 is a margin number. So if you're working with a different edition, we're in margin number page 17 and 18, but in this edition, we're on page 76, 77. He goes on page 76 toward the bottom. Whatever I have up till now accepted as most true, I have acquired either from the senses or through the senses. But from time to time I have found that these senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. All right, so first of all, Descartes very succinctly, very quickly, is going to dismiss any knowledge that comes from the senses. So we've seen reasons to doubt the senses before. Right? Our senses deceive us. When I see an oar go into water, the oar suddenly appears to be bent. And when it is pulled out of the water, it's straight again. I see mirages in the desert. When something is very far away, it looks very small. Right? My eyes deceive me. My ears deceive me. So my senses deceive me. And Descartes' argument is essentially, just as you should not trust someone who has lied to you once, because you know they're capable of lying, and there's no way to know if they're lying. A liar could be lying at any time. The same is true of the senses. If the senses ever deceive you, ever lead you astray, then the senses are not a reliable guide to truth, and you have to doubt any information that comes from the senses. So, how much of our knowledge comes from senses, right? Well, my knowledge that this is a book is based in the sensory experience. Excuse me. Oh, Jesus. Excuse me. In my sensory knowledge of this being a book, right? My sensory encounter with it. That is to say, all of my knowledge about the physical world depends on my senses, and therefore I have to doubt all knowledge I have about the sensory world. The same, he will say, is true of received wisdom. I doubt my senses, but also a lot of my knowledge comes from my teachers, people who tell me they know the truth, and I have blindly, more or less, accepted their idea of truth as absolute. Descartes is saying, again, right, these same teachers told me with certainty that the sun revolves around the earth, the earth is static and motionless. And so if they're wrong about that, I have to assume that they could be wrong about anything else also. So not only do I have to throw out any knowledge I get from my senses, I have to also throw out and count as uncertain and dubious any knowledge that I've ever gotten from my teachers. It's good advice in general, right? Always doubt your teachers. So this is the beginning of a kind of series of arguments that Descartes goes on to continue to radicalize. Excuse me. It's a little bit sitting cross-legged is very unprofessional, but here we are. A series of arguments that leads Descartes into more and more radical doubt. And he has three basic arguments for why we would need to doubt almost everything. And these three arguments begin on page 77 in this text, margin page 19 and 20. He says, well, let's start at the beginning. Yet although the senses occasionally deceive me with respect to objects which are very small or in the distance, there are many other beliefs about which doubt is quite impossible, even though they are derived from the senses. For example, that I am here sitting by the fire, wearing a winter dressing gown, holding this piece of paper in my hand, and so on. This is an interesting distinction that he makes between knowledge that we get through the senses and a kind of intuitive knowledge about being in the world. Even if I doubt all of my senses and sensory knowledge, I can't really doubt that I am here holding a book, sitting in a chair, talking into a computer. How can I doubt any of that, right? It seems self-evident. Here I am, doing these things. No amount of deception by my senses would seem to be able to make me deny that I am doing these things that I'm doing now. So he says, again, how could it be denied that these hands or this whole body are mine? Unless, perhaps, I were to liken myself to madmen, whose brains are so damaged by the persistent vapors of melancholia that they firmly maintain they are kings when they are paupers, or say they are dressed in purple when they are naked, or that their heads are made of some earthenware, or that they are pumpkins or made of glass. So I just now I think this last example, a madman who believes he's made of glass. There was a French king whose name escapes me now. Maybe it was a Charles, one of the Charleses, who was mad and believed that he was made of glass. This is perhaps a reference to a wartime king, a mad king, indeed the mad king who the Mad King in Game of Thrones is based on, if you're a Game of Thrones fan. But the larger point here is, well, I can't doubt that I'm sitting here holding a book, talking to you. And yet, I see other people who don't know where they are, don't know who they are, don't know these basic facts about themselves, right? Madmen. And so how do I know with certainty that I am not one of these madmen? How do I know that I'm not crazy? And maybe you've had this thought before. I've certainly had this thought before. Right? Perhaps I'm crazy, and everyone around me is is treating me nicely or making me feel like I'm normal uh, in order to make me feel better, but in fact I'm crazy. Or a better way to think about it is um, as a mentally ill person, as someone with some kind of madness or delusion, uh, how could I ever know that I were mad, right? I mean, many sufferers of schizophrenia, for example, believe that they are more rational and have a better grasp on the truth than those that don't suffer from that disease. So, how do I know I'm not one of those people? Uh, how can I know I'm not mad? This is an interesting point, and there's a debate that comes up in the 20th century about whether or not Descartes ever actually responds to this particular problem. How does he ever prove that he isn't mad? And it might be the case that, in fact, this very early example is one that he never really escapes, which is interesting. But um, this is his response to that. Right? But such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I took anything from them as a model for myself. Okay? That does not get you out of the argument here, Descartes. Nevertheless, he passes over it, perhaps recognizing that this is a more difficult problem than he's giving it credit. And right off, next line he says, a brilliant piece of reasoning. He sees that this is not sufficient evidence that he's not mad. Well, we'll see what he means by madness and what is possible within madness in just a minute. It says, a brilliant piece of reasoning. As if I were not a man who sleeps at night and regularly has all the same experiences while asleep as madmen do while awake. Indeed, sometimes even more improbable ones. How often asleep at night am I convinced of just such familiar events that I am here in my dressing gown sitting by the fire, when in fact I am lying undressed in bed. Okay, so a more accessible version of this madman argument is the argument from dreams. How do I know I'm not dreaming? How do I know that this moment is not a dream? How do I know that my whole life is not a dream? Right? And in thinking about the experience of dreaming, we all have different experiences of dreaming, and some of us are able to lucid dream, are able to recognize within dreams that we are dreaming. But for the most part, in dreams, we assume the dream is reality. Right? We think in dreams, we act in dreams as though we are living in reality. In a dream, most of the time, we are unable to know that it's a dream. So, what's different about this experience? How do I know that I'm not dreaming and that all these things, my being here with my book in my hand on the chair talking to the computer, isn't just a figment of my imagination, and that I'm in fact doing something completely different, lying in bed naked, right? Or what does he say? Lying in bed in my dressing gown. How can I know that I'm not dreaming? And if it's possible that I am dreaming, then every experience that I'm having, all the thoughts that I'm thinking, would be illusion. They would not be certainly true. So everything would then be false. He dismisses this possibility rather quickly again. Yet at the moment my eyes are certainly wide awake. When I look at this piece of paper, I shake my head and is not asleep. As I stretch out and feel my hand, I do so deliberately, and I know what I'm doing. All this would not happen with such distinctness to someone asleep. Okay, an important word here, which I'm actually going to mark in my book. I'm surprised I didn't mark it before, is this word distinctness. These videos are taking up all of my memory on my computer. This important word is distinctness. How do I know that I'm not dreaming? All this would not happen with such distinctness to someone asleep. And yet, he goes on, indeed, as if I did not remember on other occasions when I've been tricked by exactly similar thoughts while asleep. As I think more about this more carefully, I see plainly there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. So I want to highlight that word distinctness because that is going to come back and be important. And it's interesting that then Descartes says, well, actually, I have the same experiences while asleep. So what criteria can we use to know that we're not dreaming? Now, let me try and motivate this sleeping analogy a little bit more. This is also sometimes illustrated through the example of that movie, The Matrix. I don't know if people still watch that movie, but if so, right, the idea is that you are a body in a vat, and your energy is being sapped by robots used to power their robot society. In order to keep you docile and happy in this vat, your brain has been connected to a supercomputer, which feeds your brain all the stimuli that you need in order to believe that you are in a different world. Imagine that you are a brain in a vat, and some mad scientist, had hooked your brain up to all of these stimuli that connect to individual neurons in your brain, so much so that it could simulate for you, for your brain, the experience of being in reality. So another version of the dream argument is, how do I know I'm not in a computer simulation? I think we may have an opportunity to discuss this at the end of the semester. There's an essay called Brains in a Vat that has a nice answer to this. But right, it's the same problem updated for the era of AI and supercomputing. How do I know I'm not in a simulation? Real question. I mean, please go to Blackboard, give your thoughts in the discussion comment. I think it's interesting, an interesting question. So it says, this class, right, if we were to say that everything is a dream or could be a dream, appears to include corporeal nature in general and its extension, the shape of extended things, the quantity or size and number of these things, the place in which they may exist, and the time through which they may endure. So a reasonable conclusion from this might be that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other disciplines which depend on the study of composite things are doubtful, while arithmetic, geometry, and other subjects of this kind which deal only with the simplest and most general things, regardless of whether they really exist in nature or not, contains something certain